Joining us now is Matt Gaetz. He's a fighter. He loves his country, and he's terrific. Matt, I'm going to see you this weekend at America Fest. Looking forward to it.
Oh, man, there's nothing like Phoenix in the winter, so I can't wait. We always get to shape the vision when we're able to shape the future, and it's going to be a lot of Patriots, and I'm looking forward to being there.
So, Matt, later on, I want to talk to you about the House leadership kind of contest and race and where we agree and where we might not agree. But we'll do that in a second. I first want to talk about Twitter. You were specifically named by the degenerate boy king, Yoel Roth, pushing internally to ban you following January 6th. Your reaction, Matt?
Well, it's no surprise that the Woketopians that want to define the very nature of the truth itself didn't like something I said. And what's interesting about the reference to me is that there was no violation of Twitter policies. And so they were trying to use this awesome power that Twitter has to really shape the discussion that we have throughout the world and in this country. And they wanted to ban me despite any violation of those rules. And when we see that through the context of what they did to you, basically just trying to suppress your reach because you're effective, you see a common thread. If you were an effective conservative voice on Twitter, they were first identifying you as the problem and then subsequently trying to figure out how to torture their own set of rules to try to constrain that. I believe that this evidence unlocks a ton of litigation opportunity for state attorneys general to go after Twitter for violating their own terms of service and engaging in fraud on the consumers.
The boy king, cut 6, Yoel Roth, confessing he's deeply terrified by us, Matt. Trump supporters, play cut 6.
But what are you worried about these Twitter files?
It's terrifying. All of a sudden, we apply a misinformation label to Donald Trump's account, and I'm on the cover of the New York Post. And that is a deeply terrifying experience. And I say this from a position of unquestioned privilege as a cis white male. Like, the internet is much scarier and much worse for lots of other people who aren't me, but it was pretty fucking scary for a long time.
Trump supporters are scary. And if it wasn't for him coming in benevolently from the heavens, Matt, the Twitter internet would be much scarier. Matt, your reaction?
Oh, I'm so glad he was able to disclaim all of his privileges there. The one privilege he didn't disclaim was the privilege that they had to try to take people out of the digital world with no appeal, with no notice, and with their CEO, Jack Dorsey, lying to Congress, which is a crime, by the way, that in a just world would be thoroughly evaluated. But instead, what you have are these folks who sit around and believe that they have the power to just cancel you, to limit your ability to get your ideas out there. And look at what's going on in our country right now with all these close elections and close races. If they're able to just shave down maybe a little Charlie Kirk in Arizona, or maybe not allow our message to reach some of those key voters who might not have been engaged in politics otherwise, then you really get to a circumstance where the terms of service on Twitter and the whims of these crazy people become more important than the values that undergird our Constitution. It's why I take a very aggressive approach to the utilization of antitrust laws so that we can break up some of these entities. And then you know what will happen if you break them up? You'll actually get the Google files and the YouTube files and the Meta files, where this stuff that's going on in Twitter is going on in all those other companies.
So here's my fear. A year ago, Matt, I would have sang that song in unison with you. But now that Twitter is owned by Elon Musk, I could see Democrats want to use that break it all up strategy, but they won't actually enforce it against Meta or Google. They'll just use it as a way to go against Elon. Is that a fear you might have?
No, because Twitter is actually a far smaller business. It actually has a far less impact on the competitive marketplace than when you see the vertically integrated approach that Amazon takes, when you see the preferencing on the Apple Store, when you see what Google has done in search. So I think those
it pales in comparison. You're correct.
Those are really the big four.
I mean, Google is nearly $1.5 trillion company. I'm just approximating. I think that's about right. Twitter, based on the purchase, was an overly inflated $44 billion purchase.
Exactly.
And so that proves your point. So from an oversight perspective, and this will kind of transition us, eventually to where I want to get your opinion on it, but what can Republicans do coming into January about these Twitter files?
Well, I think the first thing we have to ascertain is whether or not the testimony we've already received was just untruthful or untruthful with malice and intent to lie. And so I think that there is thorough review that is actively ongoing right now to get into the documents that have been produced by Twitter, the testimony that has been given by their executives, and then to bounce that off of what we've learned. And there may be criminal implications to that, and Congress may have to make a referral on that, which is typically what happens when Congress feels aggrieved as a result of people lying. Beyond that, I don't think you're going to get any of the election interference charges that some are calling for, because the Federal Election Commission, in response to a complaint I filed, said all of this is legal, actually, that Twitter is allowed to discriminate against some viewpoints and is allowed to shadow ban people based on their ideology, and that that's an appropriate action for a company. I certainly don't think that's true. So it may be as much legislating around some of these issues as much as it is ensuring that there's a regulatory action, because there may not be a regulatory violation of law. I do think there's good eating, as I said earlier, for state attorneys general who can have fraud claims, who can have deceptive and unfair trade practices claims. In Florida, we have a deceptive and unfair trade practices statute. Most states do. And I think that that's going to be a very fruitful space for litigation.
So I want to play cut 5 here. The Boy King says that one of the reasons Trump was banned because of his own trauma. Play cut 5.
The events of the 6th happen. And if you talk to content moderators who worked on January 6th, myself included, the word that nearly everybody uses is trauma. We experience those events, not some of us as Americans, but not just as Americans or as citizens, but as people working on sort of how to prevent harm on the internet. And we saw people dead in the Capitol as a consequence
Why not before?
Of it.
So
who did they see dead in the Capitol?
Yeah, I mean,
were they traumatized by Ashley Babbitt?
I was going to say, I mean, based on what we now know, Ashley Babbitt, who was, in my opinion, illegally and immorally assassinated by a black, I think it was Secret Service, Capitol Police, whatever. I think he was Capitol Police.
Capitol Police.
Yeah, and Michael Byrd, is that right? Anyway, and he gets away with it, no investigation, and then Republicans defend him. As far as Officer Brian Sisnick, I believe he actually died afterwards for unrelated health complications and reasons. To this day, I guarantee if you take a poll, Sisnick, thank you. If you take a poll, people still think that there were like dozens of police officers that were murdered that day. Just not true. Anyway, but he says it was my own personal trauma. Matt, this goes to your point about there was way too much power in this person's hand. Way too much. And then you have DHS, DNI, and the FBI having weekly meetings. And one of the Slack channels, Matt, he's so casual about it, he basically tells his other buddy that was working there, hey, I got to go to the Aspen Institute and do this stuff. Can you fill in for me on one of our meeting today with the FBI? And it was struck me because this was a regular occurrence. This was like having an HR, just kind of like, okay, we got this calendared thing. The FBI's coming in. They got their badges. This wasn't something remarkable. It was routine.
And I can tell you there's great interest on the Judiciary Committee to ascertain the content of those discussions. And you know, Charlie, just like I do, that in a lot of cases, that's the DOJ people and the FBI people auditioning for their next jobs with big tech.
Well, that's exactly right.
There's a revolving door between DOJ and big tech. Yeah.
And it's how they get paid. It's a down payment for the big bucks, because when they work at DOJ, they're earning $75,000, $80,000 a year, which is a nice wage. But they want to go earn $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year, and that's how they audition. Sorry, Matt, to interrupt you.
Well, no, you see it with James Baker himself. You see him go from being one of the kind of deep state operatives around the Trump-Russia hoax to then appearing in Twitter and scrubbing information that would have demonstrated the culpability of the people who were violating the terms of service and departing from the public statements of the company regarding censorship. So it's oftentimes the same people just wearing different hats. But we want to know what was said in those meetings, and particularly when you had the FBI and DOJ trying to convince Twitter and Meta, for that matter, that certain information derogatory to the Biden family was Russian disinformation. We're going to have to get to what the actual basis is for that. And it goes to the clip you played where Mr. Roth is talking about his personal trauma. Well, I don't think that our access to the digital world ought to depend on how some Woketopian in Silicon Valley is experiencing their personal trauma on that particular day. There ought to be verifiable standards. If we aren't going to break up these companies, and I wouldn't suggest we break up Twitter quite yet, there should be some sort of regulation more akin to a public utility rather than an entity that's just able to act on these whims. And while it's certainly a great thing that Elon Musk is putting all this information out to the country, we should not rest on the notion that, well, Elon owns Twitter, so everything's okay now. There's a lot of this discourse that goes on outside of Twitter, and, Twitter was in bad hands, might now be in good hands, but it could fall back into bad hands. And so I think we need to have a standard that is transparent, where people have an appeal process, and that way there'll be greater confidence that the conversation going on in the digital square is in fact a legitimate one, not some operation by the FBI.
No one voted for Yoel Roth. No one knew he even existed. And he had more power than the elected that the sovereign voluntarily gave power to. That's wrong. I don't care what your political affiliation is. It's wrong that some brat, who's also a degenerate, by the way, and writes about really weird and creepy stuff, is able to police speech like that. It's immoral, it's unconstitutional, it's a civilizational issue. Matt, stay right there. We're going to have a fun conversation after the break. All right, welcome back, everybody. We got the great Matt Gaetz here. All right, Matt, we got 5 minutes. We're going to do this quick. You got to walk me through the strategy for 1-3. Because, so 1-3, just so everyone knows, Speaker of the House vote, Matt has come out against Kevin McCarthy and has said under no circumstance am I going to vote for McCarthy. And so what's the plan? What's the strategy? Who do you think should be Speaker, Matt? We need a name.
Well, I would vote for Jim Jordan for Speaker. I'd vote for Andy Biggs. There's actually probably 221 of the 222 that I'd at least be open-minded about. It's ridiculous to assume that only Kevin McCarthy can lead the Republican conference. And I think more important than the individual are the rules and the values and the strategy that the House of Representatives will have on the 4th of January and beyond.
Okay, I agree
Seven
with
of my
that.
colleagues, seven of my colleagues has signed a letter that lay that out in Technicolor. They want single subject, they want a plan on spending, they want conservatives on key committees, and they want the motion to vacate the chair that existed for centuries until Nancy Pelosi changed it. McCarthy seems to prefer the Pelosi approach, not the Thomas Jefferson approach.
I agree with that. So with what you're saying, though, is that potentially it's not about Kevin. It's about if these concessions can be made, then maybe a deal could be struck. Is that right?
Well, what is disheartening and what led me to my view that I don't think Kevin's going to be our speaker is that Kevin has said under no circumstance will he consider the Jeffersonian motion to vacate. He is only going to agree to something far closer.
So I'm ignorant. I'm ignorant on this. What is motion to vacate the chair? Sorry to interrupt, Matt. We're short on time. Go ahead.
For centuries, any member of Congress could call a vote of no confidence on the Speaker of the House, and all members would have to cast that vote, and it would determine whether or not that speaker would continue. Now, John Boehner got removed when Mark Meadows did that because he realized that members were going to have to take a tough vote or vote against him. So it's a mechanism to keep the speaker accountable to the membership. And we're not asking for crazy things. We just want to pass appropriations bills separately. We want to have 72 hours to read the bills. And the fact that Kevin McCarthy has been recalcitrant against the Jeffersonian motion to vacate disqualifies him from consideration in my eyes and in the eyes of a growing number of House Republicans.
Now, I guess the counter argument, and I'm sure you guys can figure this out, is won't it just turn every day someone could do a motion to vacate the chair, or does it take a certain amount of votes, or does it go to voice vote? Could it potentially derail the business of Congress? I don't know as a layman.
I guess it could, but in hundreds of years, it was only used like less than 5 times. So that would defy history. Also, like if the Democrats did that every day, if every day we had the prayer, the pledge, and the motion to vacate.
I mean, I could see them do that.
Kevin McCarthy stronger. By the way, if they did that, there's no way any Republican could vote for a Democrat motion to vacate. And so I think it could actually be a unifying force if used by the Democrats, but it's an accountability measure for Republicans who feel like otherwise Kevin will lie to us.
So the fear that I have and other people have is, okay, let's say it goes to 1-3. You guys say we're not voting, and then it goes to conference, and then we're just supposed to hope it gets sorted out there. Matt, I have very little faith in kind of hope as a strategy right now. So give me some confidence. Give our audience some confidence that that circus will result in a stronger country.
I will point the audience to a piece that was just published in Politico this morning busting the unity speaker bubble. So this totally debunks the hoax that somehow like Fred Upton or some moderate Republican is going to be speaker. It debunks the hoax that it's going to be a Democrat speaker. We will get to a Republican speaker. Now, it might not be on the 3rd. There might be a slight delay, but I would rather it take a little bit longer and get it right than just coronate Kevin McCarthy.
So you acknowledge, but do you at least acknowledge there is a risk? There's a risk that this thing could get out of control. I mean, the Uniparty would love nothing more. I mean, you're saying that it's a political piece. I haven't read it.
Kevin McCarthy is the Uniparty's candidate. That is obvious, right? And he's also recalcitrant on these rules changes that I would think any American would reasonably agree to, like giving us 72 hours to read the bills, having a single subject with germanity so that you're not voting on like the farm bill and the war in Yemen at the same time, or the national defense and WERDA like we had to do last week. So those are the demands we've placed on McCarthy. He's unequivocally said he would rather not be speaker than agree to some of the things in this memo. And so at some point we have to move on. This is not a doomsday. It might take a little longer, but ultimately, if we get a speaker responsive to the membership and agreeing to rules that will open up the House so that we can do a good job for our constituents, that's what's better for the country in the long run.
So Matt, 20 seconds. If those concessions are made, are you at least open to voting for Kevin for speaker?
Well, I have yet to see any deal that doesn't require some element of trust to bind it together. And since I don't trust Kevin McCarthy, that's why I am not voting for him. Now, if somehow someone can bind some deal together that is not in any way reliant on trust, I'm always open-minded, but right now I'm not going to vote for Kevin.
Open-minded is good. So, Matt, we got to make sure the House stays Republican. That's
not voting for
my number one mission is you got to make sure the House stays Republican. We can't lose it through a process.